I never thought the world would end on a Thursday. Thursdays were usually quiet days for me. People rushed past my alley near 43rd Street with the restless hurry of midweek exhaustion, barely casting a glance at me or at my mutt, Shadow. He was a medium-sized black dog with one silver streak down his face, and somehow he always managed to look dignified no matter how cold the nights got. I used to joke that he was the gentleman between the two of us. On that morning, though, even Shadow seemed tense. His ears stood high, and he kept sniffing the air, letting out these low uneasy whines. I remember thinking it was odd. The city smelled different. Usually it smelled like a mix of damp concrete, hot garbage from the night before, and exhaust fumes grinding against the wind. But that day, the air tasted metallic. Cold. Too cold for November. The sky had a strange color to it too, like it was bruised. A deep purple fading into gray, thick clouds hanging heavy as if the heavens were suffocating. There was no sunrise, only a dim glow behind the clouds that tried to pass for daylight. People noticed. I could see it in how they walked, slower than usual, glancing up, squinting at the unnatural gloom. The city was loud as always, horns echoing between buildings, distant construction rattling the air, someone yelling about something across the street. But underneath all that noise, I sensed a quietness. A strange, almost electric hush behind the chaos, like nature was holding its breath. Shadow nudged my hand with his cold nose. I rubbed behind his ears. "What's wrong, boy?" I whispered. He only whined again. Around 9 a siren wailed. Not a police siren. Not an ambulance. This one was deeper. Longer. A warning tone I'd never heard in my life. People stopped in place, turning their heads like animals sensing danger. The sound rolled through the streets, bouncing off buildings, and my stomach tightened. All my instincts screamed run even though I had nowhere to run to. A giant digital billboard flickered on above Times Square. Normally we'd see ads for movies, perfume brands, holiday sales with models frozen in perfect smiles. Instead, the screen displayed an emergency broadcast alert. The picture was glitchy, static crawling across the image like ice cracking. A government symbol appeared, then a voice. It was trembling, not with fear, but with urgency. All citizens are advised to seek immediate shelter. A catastrophic temperature drop is expected. Repeat, seek immediate shelter. Stay indoors. Avoid exposure. More static. Then the voice cut out. People stared in disbelief. Some laughed nervously, thinking it was a glitch or some weird test. But I felt something hit my cheek a moment later. Not snow. Snow was soft. Gentle. This felt like sand. Frozen sand. I touched my face and wiped off tiny crystalline particles that shimmered in the dim light. Then the wind hit. A sudden, violent gust that howled between buildings like a living thing. It was cold, but not the kind of cold I've known while sleeping on concrete. This cold was sharp, biting, unnatural. It sliced through layers of clothes, skin, bone. People screamed as the wind intensified. Papers flew everywhere. A metal trash can rolled across the street, clattering loudly. A taxi skidded and slammed into a lamp post. Shadow barked wildly and pressed himself against my leg, trembling. In the distance, clouds spiraled downward like a massive whirlpool forming in the sky. Something wasn't right. It wasn't a snowstorm. It wasn't a blizzard. It was like the atmosphere itself was collapsing. I grabbed my old backpack and stuffed in what little I had: a half loaf of bread, a worn blanket, a metal cup, and a lighter that only worked half the time. Survival mode kicked in. When you've lived on the streets long enough, you learn to move fast when danger creeps in. Even if you have nowhere to hide, you run anyway. I wrapped my coat tighter around me and tugged Shadow's leash. "Come on, boy. We gotta go." We bolted down 43rd Street. The city that never sleeps was now filled with panic. People shoved past each other. Someone tripped near a mailbox, screaming for help as a crowd rushed over them, not stopping. The wind roared louder, carrying with it a strange low rumble, like ice sheets grinding against stone. Glass shattered above us as a window blew out from the cold pressure, raining shards onto the pavement. Shadow yelped, and I shielded him with my arm. One piece nicked my sleeve but missed my skin. The buildings around us groaned. I could hear creaking, cracking, as if the steel structures themselves were freezing too fast. We reached the subway entrance near Bryant Park, but a wave of people was already flooding into the staircase. So many bodies packed together, screaming, pushing, desperate for underground shelter. I knew right away it would be a death trap. Too many people. No airflow. If the cold was collapsing above ground, who knew what would happen below? Struggling our way down wasn't an option. Shadow barked sharply as another gust hit us, even stronger than before. My teeth chattered uncontrollably. Frost was already forming on the railings. Metal turned white before my eyes. The street lamps dimmed, flickered, then went out completely. Darkness washed over the block except for car headlights stabbing through the gloom. For a moment the world felt silent again. Like the city fell into a void. Then boom. A deep thunder-like explosion echoed across Manhattan. I spun around in the direction of the sound. The Hudson River. A massive cloud burst upward, as if the water itself had flash frozen instantly and cracked apart. A plume of fog and ice shot into the sky like a volcano. The shockwave knocked over several people. I stumbled but kept my grip on Shadow. "This is it," I muttered. "This is how the world ends." But I wasn't going to die on a sidewalk. There was one place I could go. One place most people never bothered with. The old storage tunnels under the abandoned post office building. A maze of forgotten rooms and corridors where I used to shelter on the coldest winter nights. It wasn't warm, but it was sheltered, hidden, and reinforced by thick walls. It might just save us. I turned east and started running. The wind clawed at my face, ripping tears from my eyes. Every breath burned my lungs like inhaling knives. The cityscape twisted in the dim light, shapes made eerie by the swirling frost. Shop signs creaked violently. A bus, frozen solid in minutes, skidded and slammed sideways across 9th Avenue. I didn't look back. I just ran. Shadow stayed close, his paws slipping on the icy pavement, but he kept pace. The world behind us sounded like it was tearing apart. But ahead lay the old post office. Our one chance. And I was determined to take it. The entrance to the old post office tunnels wasn't really an entrance at all. It was a broken metal grate behind the building, half hidden under years of grime and forgotten trash. Most people walked by without even noticing it. Good for me, because in the middle of an Ice Age apocalypse, the last thing I needed was 1,000 panicked New Yorkers squeezing into a space barely big enough for 2 grown men and a dog. Shadow and I scrambled toward the building as the temperature dropped harder and faster than anything I had ever felt in my life. The cold wasn't just cold anymore. It felt alive, like a presence pressing against my skin, seeping into every pore. Each breath iced the inside of my nose. My fingers were stiff, barely responding as I yanked off the loose pieces of the grate. The wind screeched behind us, hitting my back so violently that I stumbled forward. I grabbed the edge of the concrete wall to steady myself, my gloves freezing to the surface for a second before I ripped them free. The moment I pulled the grate aside, a wave of stale, dusty air rose from the darkness below. It smelled like damp cardboard, rusted metal, and something old and forgotten. But compared to the frozen hell forming behind us, it felt like salvation. "Down, Shadow," I urged. He hesitated only briefly before he leapt into the hole, claws clacking on the metal rung ladder. I followed, climbing down as the world above us roared. When my boots hit the floor of the service tunnel, everything went black. Not city night black. Not storm black. But pitch black, the kind of darkness that closes around you like a fist. I fumbled with my lighter, my hand shaking so hard I almost dropped it. When the tiny flame sparked, it carved out a trembling amber glow, revealing cracked concrete walls coated in dust and cobwebs. Good boy, Shadow, I whispered, reaching down to touch him. His fur was cold but dry. He pressed into me, tail low but steady. He trusted me. That trust kept me moving. I looked up the ladder. The wind above shrieked as though searching for us. Snow or whatever icy substance was falling from the sky clattered against the metal grate like brittle bones. If we had stayed even a minute longer, we would have been frozen solid. We walked deeper into the tunnel, the little flame in my hand sputtering as the air shifted around us. The sounds from above grew muffled, replaced by the hollow echo of my footsteps and Shadow's soft padding beside me. The darkness seemed endless. Tunnels like these stretched beneath half of the old buildings on the block, originally used for storage, mail sorting, or whatever forgotten purpose the city once had for them. Time had erased their importance, but for me, they had become a temporary home during the coldest winters. Now they were my lifeline. After a few minutes of walking, the tunnel opened into a wider room. My lighter flickered across a forgotten storage area filled with rusted carts, stacks of wooden crates, and broken shelving. Dust motes drifted through the flame light like tiny frozen stars. The air was still and heavy, but warmer than outside by a miracle of concrete insulation. I set down my pack and exhaled slowly. My breath fogged in front of me, but it was nothing like the icy vapor from above. Shadow circled twice and lay down, though he kept his head up, ears twitching at every sound. We survived the first wave, I murmured, mostly to convince myself. But survival wasn't comfort. I had no idea what was happening above us. The emergency warning. The instant temperature drop. The way the sky seemed to spiral downward. And that explosion on the Hudson. It wasn't normal weather. It wasn't even normal catastrophe. Something bigger was happening, and it was happening fast. I knelt beside my pack and pulled out the last half of the bread. It was stale, but that didn't matter. I tore a small piece and gave it to Shadow. He ate it quickly, tail swinging once in gratitude. Eat slow, boy. We don't know when we're getting more. I took a bite myself. It tasted like dust and survival. As I chewed, a faint vibration ran through the floor. Not loud enough to shake anything, but enough to feel in my bones. I paused, holding my breath. Shadow lifted his head and looked at me, eyes wide. Another tremor. Then another, slightly stronger. The tunnels groaned around us as dust rained down from the ceiling. Something was happening above ground. Something massive. I rushed to the far wall of the room where an old maintenance hatch sat half broken. I grabbed the metal edge and pulled. It screeched open, revealing another passageway. Come on, Shadow. We can't stay too close to the surface. We slipped through the opening and entered a narrower tunnel. This one was older. The brickwork along the sides was cracked, and long, tangled pipes ran overhead like the exposed veins of the building. The air smelled faintly of mold and cold metal. My lighter flickered again, threatening to die. I shook it gently. Stay with me, I whispered to the flame. We reached a spot where the ceiling dipped lower. I had to crouch to pass through. As we moved, an echo bounced down the tunnel from behind us. It was faint but clear. A booming creak followed by the sudden crash of something heavy collapsing. Then the unmistakable sound of wind screaming into a new opening. Damn. The ceiling above the storage room must be cracked under the atmospheric pressure. Or maybe the building itself was giving way. Either way, staying near the surface wasn't an option anymore. We had to go deeper. For a while, all I could hear was the tapping of dripping water echoing from somewhere far away. Each drop rang like a metallic heartbeat. My breath felt louder than it should have. Shadow's claws clicked sharply on the concrete. The air grew colder the further we went, but not the lethal razor cold from above. Then we turned a corner into a wider, long-forgotten corridor. My lighter cast a dim glow across ancient graffiti, peeling paint, and a row of doors lining the right-hand wall. Delivery rooms, storage units, maybe even old offices from decades ago. Most of the doors were closed tight, but one hung crookedly off its hinges. I approached slowly. Shadow growled, low and soft. "Easy, boy." I nudged the crooked door with my foot. It squealed open, revealing a small room filled with broken furniture and piles of paper that had turned yellow with age. But there was one thing that caught my eye: a large metal cabinet pushed into the corner. Unlocked. I walked to it and pulled open the door. Inside were old emergency supplies. Dusty but intact. A miracle stash forgotten by time. There were sealed water bottles, a few thermal blankets, a box of ancient but usable protein bars, and even a crank flashlight. My heart pounded in disbelief. Jackpot. But the moment I grabbed the flashlight, another deep tremor shook the tunnels. This one stronger. Dust poured down like sand. Somewhere far above, something massive cracked with a sound that echoed through the earth. The temperature in the corridor dropped sharply, a freezing gust blasting through unseen cracks in the tunnel walls. Shadow barked in panic. I clicked the crank flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness just as the lighter finally died. We were running out of time. If the tunnels couldn't withstand the cold, we needed to find a deeper chamber, somewhere sealed, somewhere the cold couldn't reach. But as I turned to leave the room, I heard something. Footsteps. Slow. Dragging. Echoing down the corridor behind us. My blood froze. We weren't alone. The footsteps echoed down the tunnel with a rhythm that didn't belong underground. Slow. Dragging. Uneven. The kind of steps a person might take if they were half frozen or wounded. But there was something else to them, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't just the sound, it was the weight of it. Heavy. Measured. Like whoever was out there wasn't in a hurry because they already knew they would reach us. Shadow pressed against my leg, his growl low and shaky. For a dog that had survived years on the streets, seeing fights, hearing gunshots, and brushing death more times than most people do in their entire life, the sound rattling his throat now wasn't normal fear. It was instinct. Primal danger. I tightened my grip on the crank flashlight. Its beam flickered as if it were afraid too, casting long shadows that crawled along the tunnel walls like living things. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The air smelled colder suddenly, that metallic bite returning as if icy fingers were reaching deeper into the tunnels. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracking. "Is someone there?" The dragging footsteps paused. Silence swallowed the tunnel. A thick, heavy silence that seemed to push down on my chest. Then something scraped against the floor. A long, slow scrape like metal on concrete. Shadow let out a bark and retreated a step, teeth bared. Whatever was out there wasn't a normal survivor. I turned off the flashlight for a moment, plunging us into darkness. I needed to hear without the distraction of the beam flickering. In the pitch black, every sound amplified. My breathing. Shadow's soft whimpering. The faint tremors in the walls as the city above froze further. And then I heard it. A breath. Shallow, raspy, broken. Almost like ice cracking in lungs that shouldn't be breathing at all. I switched the flashlight back on, hand trembling. The beam sliced through the dark and illuminated the tunnel in front of me. For a moment, there was nothing. Just dusty air swirling, drifting debris, and cracked walls. Then movement. A figure stepped into the far edge of the light, but only partly. I saw the outline of a human shape, hunched forward unnaturally, as if the joints had frozen in wrong angles. The left shoulder rose higher than the right. One arm hung too long, dangling near the ground. Frost coated the figure entirely, glistening like powdered glass under the flashlight. What froze my blood was the face. Or what was left of it. Patches of skin were covered in ice, cracked and peeling. The eyes were pale and cloudy, staring without seeing. Icicles hung from the jawline, and breath escaped in faint plumes that flickered like dying smoke. It wasn't dead. But it wasn't alive either. The instant it saw the light, it let out a noise I will never forget, a hollow, gurgling groan that echoed through the tunnel and made my stomach twist. Then it lurched forward. "Go, Shadow!" I shouted, backing away from the creature's staggering steps. He barked once and stayed at my side, refusing to leave me. I clutched the supplies bag tight and bolted into the corridor. The flashlight beam shook wildly in my hand, bouncing across walls and throwing jagged shadows everywhere. The creature picked up speed behind us, its dragging footsteps turning into uneven slaps on the concrete floor. It moved wrong. Too stiff, too cold, too broken to run, but somehow it still managed to close the distance. I sprinted deeper into the tunnel system, air burning in my lungs. The cold intensified, seeping into my bones. Shadow ran ahead, guiding me through the maze of corridors with quick glances back to make sure I was following. The tunnel split ahead of us. Left was narrower and sloped downward. Right was wider but filled with debris from a collapsed ceiling. "Down, boy!" I turned left. The creature behind me let out another guttural cry, the sound bouncing off the walls and echoing in every direction. It was closer now. Much closer. We ran until my legs started to scream in pain. The flashlight flickered but held on. The air down here felt colder, heavier, as if the cold from above was leaking through cracks in the earth. My breath fogged so thickly it looked like smoke. Then we reached a dead end. A rusted metal door stood in front of us. Thick. Heavy. Half buried in the wall like a sealed vault. No handle. No lock. Just a metal wheel in the center, frozen in place with decades of rust. I grabbed it and pulled. Nothing. I braced my feet and hauled with all my strength. The wheel groaned. Shadow barked urgently behind me as the creature grew closer. "Come on!" I yelled through gritted teeth, muscles trembling. The metal let out a shriek and moved half an inch. I pulled again. Another inch. My fingers slipped. Sweat mixed with cold ran down my back. A scraping sound echoed behind us. The creature was entering the corridor. With one last desperate heave, I twisted the wheel fully. The door clicked and swung inward just enough for Shadow to squeeze through. "Inside, boy!" I shoved him in and turned to face the corridor. The creature lurched into view, its head twitching unnaturally as it leaned forward. Frost cracked across its face as it opened its mouth wider than any normal jaw should. Its fingers stretched toward us, skin tearing like brittle ice. I stumbled through the doorway and hauled the door shut just as the creature slammed against it. The metal rang like a bell, the force reverberating through my arms. Shadows inside wavered under the flashlight beam. The creature hit the door again. And again. But the room we had entered was made of thick reinforced steel. Some kind of old utility bunker or maintenance chamber. The door held. Finally, after several strikes, the banging grew weaker and then stopped completely. A faint dragging sound retreated slowly back into the tunnels. I collapsed onto the floor, chest heaving, limbs trembling violently with cold and fear. Shadow nuzzled my face, whining softly. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, though I wasn't sure of anything anymore. I lifted the flashlight and finally looked around the chamber. The room was larger than I expected, maybe 20 feet across. Thick concrete walls. Pipes climbing upward into darkness. Old metal lockers on one side. A broken control panel on the other. Dust layered everything, but the air was still breathable and warmer than the tunnel outside. Then something caught my eye in the corner. Footprints. Not mine. Not Shadow's. Fresh. Recent. And human. My throat tightened. Someone else had been here. Maybe still was. Shadow lifted his head suddenly and stared toward the darkest corner of the chamber. His tail went rigid. I slowly turned the flashlight in that direction. And saw movement. The flashlight beam trembled as I aimed it toward the corner. The light stretched across the concrete floor, revealing dust patterns, scattered debris, and then finally landing on a shape crouched low behind an overturned metal locker. At first, it didn't look human. I only saw a hunched outline, wrapped in layers of shredded fabric, unmoving, almost blending in with the shadows. Shadow stood stiff beside me, growling with a trembling throat. Not the fierce warning growl he used on stray dogs or drunk men in the streets. No, this one carried uncertainty. Fear laced with caution. He didn't know what we were facing. Neither did I. I swallowed hard and whispered, "Hello, you alive back there?" The figure flinched. Not a full movement, just a slight twitch, like someone who had been startled out of a long, tense freeze. Slowly, very slowly, a hand emerged from behind the locker. Fingers thin and trembling, wrapped in strips of cloth for warmth. Then the rest of the arm followed. I raised the flashlight higher, ready to grab a piece of metal off the floor if I needed to defend myself. The light caught the figure's face as they rose to their knees. It was a woman. Her hair was matted and frosted at the tips, tangled around her face like she'd been crawling through snowdrifts for days. Her cheeks were hollow, nose reddened from cold, lips cracked. But her eyes, they were wide, sharp, alert. Not cloudy like the frozen creature in the tunnels. She was alive. Human. Terrified. "Please," she croaked, raising a hand in front of her face to shield her eyes from the beam. Don't hurt me." I lowered the flashlight a little, enough that the light softened. "I'm not here to hurt you," I said, breath fogging in the limited warmth of the bunker. I didn't know anyone else was down here. Her eyes darted toward the door behind me. She must have heard the creature outside. The banging. The scraping. The retreat. "You led it away from here," she whispered. "You saved me." "I wouldn't go that far," I said. "We were running for our lives." Shadow took a cautious step forward. She froze, hands up, backing against the wall as if he were a wild bear. "It's okay," I said gently. "He won't hurt you unless you hurt us. His name's Shadow." The dog sniffed the air, tail stiff, then slowly lowered himself into a sitting position. Still alert. Still watching her carefully. The woman breathed out shakily and lowered her hands. She looked exhausted, on the edge of collapse, the kind of fatigue that burrows into a person over days of terror and cold. I aimed the flashlight around the room again, letting the beam land on the old lockers. "There might be supplies in here," I said. "Maybe something we can use." The woman pushed a strand of frozen hair behind her ear. Her voice was hoarse. "I already checked them. Most are empty, but there's a few things." She reached behind the metal locker she'd been hiding behind and dragged out a small pile of scavenged items. A dented thermos. A pocket knife. A jar of what looked like dried beans. A strip of cloth soaked in something brownish, probably old blood. She noticed me looking at it and pulled her arm closer, covering it instinctively. Her eyes dropped to her sleeve. It was torn, crudely wrapped around her forearm. "You're injured," I said. She hesitated, then nodded. "Frostbite got me yesterday." "Soft pockets of skin," she whispered. "They tore open climbing down a broken stairway. I didn't think I'd make it down here." I knelt beside her, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Mind if I take a look?" She hesitated, then pulled the cloth aside. Beneath it, red swollen skin stretched along the edge of her forearm. Angry and raw, but not blackened. Not dead tissue. Not yet. "This needs cleaning," I murmured. "And warmth. Real warmth." Good luck finding that in this freezer, she said with a faint, bitter laugh. I dug into my pack and pulled out a thermal blanket from the old emergency cabinet we raided earlier. Her eyes widened like she'd forgotten such things existed. Where did you find that? Storage room back there, I said, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. Old supplies. Probably from some long-forgotten city emergency stockpile. She clutched the blanket as though it were gold, pressing her face into it briefly just to feel the insulation. What's your name? I asked. She exhaled into the blanket before answering. Mia. I'm Daniel, I said. And this guy is Shadow. He thinks he runs the place. Shadow huffed through his nose, as if agreeing. Mia managed a weak smile. It softened her torn, frostbitten features, revealing the person underneath the exhaustion. A person who had been fighting to stay alive long before we got here. What happened to you? I asked gently. How did you end up in the tunnels? She closed her eyes as if gathering strength to relive it. I was working at an office when the emergency broadcast hit. People panicked. Everyone ran into the subway stations. Too many of us. We suffocated down there. The air froze. Pipes burst. I was lucky enough to find another way out before the collapse. Collapse? She nodded. The ground above caved in. It brought the tunnels down with it. I barely escaped. Then I heard things moving down here. Not human things. My stomach tightened. The frozen creature. She met my eyes with fear still fresh in hers. I thought I was alone. Until you came. Before I could respond, a faint rumble vibrated through the chamber. Dust fell from the ceiling. Pipes rattled overhead. Shadow snapped to attention, ears pinned back. Another tremor, I whispered. Mia lifted her head, eyes wide. It's getting worse. The city's freezing too fast. The infrastructure can't handle this. The metal lockers rattled again. The lights on the broken control panel flickered with faint static for the first time since we entered. What the hell? I murmured, shining the flashlight on it. The flicker grew brighter, like the panel was receiving power from somewhere deep in the building. A single red indicator light blinked faintly on and off, on and off. Mia crawled closer to it. Is it still powered? I doubt it, I said. Probably residual energy or something. Then a noise echoed through the pipes. A soft humming. Mechanical. Distant. Mia looked at me sharply. That's not residual. Shadow barked once, sharply, tail straight up. His hackles rising. Something was happening deeper in the tunnels. Something mechanical. I stood slowly, flashlight shaking in my hand. We listened as the humming grew louder, steady, rhythmic, like machinery waking up after years of sleep. Then the room lights flickered to life for half a second, bathing the bunker in a dim yellow glow. And immediately went out again. But that half second was enough for me to see something that made my heart stop. On the far wall, behind layers of dust, a faded sign glowed under the brief light. Emergency ice protocol shelter level below. Authorized access only. Cryogenic facility. I stared at the sign as darkness swallowed the room again. Cryogenic facility, Mia whispered. Her voice shook. What does that mean? It means, I said slowly, pulse racing, this bunker isn't the deepest level. There's a whole other facility below us. And whatever machinery just woke up is down there. Mia shivered under her blanket. Shadow began growling again, low and warning. Because something else had woken up with it. And it was approaching. I woke the next morning buried under my blanket, my body shivering even though I had kept the fire going for most of the night. The wind had shifted sometime before dawn, blowing straight into the small alley where I had found shelter. It howled like a living creature, rattling the loose metal sheets above me and sending tiny ice crystals drifting down onto my face. For a moment I thought I was still dreaming. The world felt unreal, too quiet, too cold, too empty. But then my stomach growled, sharp and painful, reminding me that I was very much awake and starving. I pushed myself upright and blinked into the pale light creeping through the alley entrance. The storm had calmed, but the snow outside had piled knee-high. Entire cars looked half swallowed by the frost. The street signs were coated in a thick shell of rime so white they looked carved from bone. New York City, the place that once buzzed with noise, traffic, and people, looked like a frozen graveyard. I rubbed my hands together to bring some warmth into my fingers and began packing the few items I had. The blanket, the cracked lighter, the empty water bottle, and a broken piece of metal pipe I kept for protection. I knew I could not stay in the alley any longer. The cold was getting worse every hour. My shelter was nothing compared to the brutal wind carving its way through the city. I needed a better place, somewhere indoors, somewhere with less exposure and maybe, if luck was still a thing in this world, some food. I stepped out of the alley and my boots cracked through the top layer of snow. The air bit at my exposed skin instantly. I tightened my scarf around my face and started walking toward the main avenue where I knew a grocery store used to be. Before the Ice Age apocalypse started, the place was open 24 hours. Now it was buried in silence and ice like everything else. Walking wasn't easy. The snow felt heavy and sticky, clinging to my legs. The cold made my muscles stiff, and every step felt like lifting weights. The sky was colorless, just a washed-out gray stretching endlessly across the horizon. After what felt like an hour but was probably only 15 minutes, I reached the corner of the street. The store was still there, but its glass windows had shattered inward. Snow had blown inside, creating drifts across the once busy aisles. I hesitated at the doorway, peering into the darkness. No movement. No sound except the faint groaning of the wind outside. I stepped inside. The air was even colder than outside, as if the walls trapped the chill and held onto it like a jealous ghost. Shelves were knocked over, packages torn open, cans scattered under a layer of frost. People had raided the place before the deep freeze hit. I walked down the aisles carefully, my senses alert. I searched the shelves, digging under snow and broken cardboard boxes. Everything edible seemed long gone or frozen solid beyond saving. My hands were numb as I kept searching, hoping for anything. And then, tucked behind a fallen display stand, I found something. A small metal can. The label was half torn, but it looked like some kind of soup. I grabbed it and held it close to my chest, as if afraid it would disappear if I looked away. I checked the can for dents or rust. It was cold, almost painfully so, but intact. I felt relief sweep through me. It wasn't much, but it was something. I searched more carefully around the same spot and found 2 more cans, both frozen stiff but still sealed. My heart pounded with a mix of excitement and desperation. For a homeless man in a frozen apocalypse, 3 cans might as well have been treasure. I tucked them into my jacket and kept moving deeper into the store. Toward the back, I found the employee break room. Its door hung slightly open, covered in a thin sheet of ice. I pushed it slowly, and it creaked loudly, echoing through the silent building. Inside, there was a small table, a microwave, and some old chairs. More importantly, the room seemed a little more insulated from the outside cold. Not warm, but less brutal. I decided to take a risk and stay there for a while to rest. I pushed one of the chairs near the center of the room and sat down, breathing hard. The cans pressed against my ribs under my jacket, a comforting reminder that I had something to live for today. But as I sat there catching my breath, I heard something. A noise. Soft at first, like the shuffle of fabric. Then a faint clicking sound, almost like footsteps crunching lightly on ice. I froze. My hand instinctively reached for the metal pipe. I listened carefully. The noise came again, this time from the hallway just outside the break room. My heartbeat thumped in my ears. I stood slowly and moved toward the door, gripping the pipe tightly. For a moment I thought maybe someone else was scavenging. Maybe another survivor. Maybe someone like me, desperate, cold, and hungry. But then the noise became clearer. It wasn't footsteps. Not exactly. It was more uneven, dragging, almost scraping. My breath hitched. I hadn't seen any animals since the freeze began. The cold had driven most creatures away or killed them. But the idea of something else moving out there, something that survived this cold, filled me with dread. I peeked through the crack of the break room door. The hallway was dark except for a faint glimmer of light bouncing off the walls. The sound grew louder. Something was definitely moving. My throat tightened. My instinct screamed one thing. Leave. Now. Without wasting another second, I grabbed the cans, shoved them into my pockets, and slipped quietly through the opposite exit of the break room, leading toward the emergency exit door. My boots crunched softly on the frost-covered tiles. Every step made me wince. The scraping sound behind me grew louder, closer. I didn't dare look back. I reached the emergency exit and pushed the bar slowly, careful not to make too much noise. The door opened just enough for me to slip through, and I stepped outside into a narrow alley filled with blinding white light. The door shut behind me with a dull thud. I stood still for a moment, breathing hard, trying to hear if anything followed. Nothing. Just the wind again. Whatever was inside the grocery store was still inside, and I was out. I leaned against the icy brick wall, letting my heart slow. Whatever that thing was, I didn't want to find out. I tightened my grip on the food in my pockets and started walking again. Through the snow. Through the silence. Through the frozen ruins of a city that once never slept. At least I was alive. And as long as I had breath left in me, I would keep moving. I kept moving through the snow-choked streets, boots sinking with every step, dragging behind me the weight of the world and the tiny hope that we could survive one more day. Shadow ran ahead in bursts, sniffing the frozen air, ears twitching at sounds too faint for me to hear. The city had transformed overnight into something alien. Once, New York had been loud, alive, and relentless. Now it was a silent monument of ice and frost, every street a frozen canyon where the wind roared like a living thing. The sun, or what little remained of it, hung pale in the gray sky, a dim orb behind heavy clouds. It cast everything in an eerie twilight, gray shadows stretching over the snow-covered ruins of cars, street lamps, and broken signs. Icicles hung from every protruding surface, sharp as knives, shimmering faintly like shards of glass. Even the air felt heavier than usual, the cold pressing down on me as though it had weight. I wrapped my scarf tighter and tried to ignore the burning ache in my lungs every time I inhaled. I knew I needed shelter, and not just any shelter. The grocery store break room I had spent the night in was temporary. Somewhere deeper, more secure, hidden from both the cold and whatever else might be wandering the frozen streets. My mind kept returning to the old subway tunnels. Dangerous, yes, but insulated. A labyrinth of forgotten passages that could give Shadow and me the chance to survive a little longer. I started toward the nearest entrance, a cracked stairwell covered in a thick layer of ice and snow. Every step was a gamble. One slip could send me tumbling down hard, the metal rails slick and deadly. Shadow moved ahead, agile as ever, occasionally stopping to glance back and make sure I was keeping pace. As we descended, the air grew heavier, tinged with the musty scent of damp concrete and old mildew. A fine mist rose from the walls where the cold met the slight residual warmth of the underground, creating a ghostly haze that made the dim light from above flicker eerily. Shadow's ears twitched constantly, every footstep echoing in the hollow stairwell. I gripped the railing, teeth chattering from the cold despite the layers I wore. Finally, we reached the tunnel proper. The walls here were lined with old advertisements, peeling posters of long-forgotten movies and products. The concrete floor was cracked, and in some places, small icicles had formed along the edges. The sound of our footsteps echoed endlessly, bouncing back and forth in the confined space. I couldn't help but glance up at the tracks where the trains used to roar. Now the tracks were covered in frost, twisted in some areas, silent monuments to the city's frozen death. I walked cautiously, flashlight in hand, scanning the darkness ahead. Every shadow seemed alive, every flicker in the light of potential threat. Shadow padded close, ears pinned, tail low. The tunnels had always been a refuge in winter, but now they felt like a cave in a mountain of ice, isolated from the world above. I kept moving, following a path I knew from nights spent hiding from the cold during previous winters. Then I heard it, a faint metallic clinking echoing somewhere ahead. I froze, listening. Shadow growled softly, his hackles rising. The sound was irregular, like someone dragging metal across the floor. My heart pounded. I had not seen another living human since the ice storm hit. Could it be another survivor? Or worse, something else? I crouched behind a crumbling wall for a moment, straining my ears. The clinking stopped. Silence pressed down on us. Then a whisper of movement, so subtle it could have been a trick of the echoing tunnel. My grip on the flashlight tightened, knuckles white. Shadow pressed against my leg, low growl vibrating through his body. I took a deep breath and moved forward slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, a forgotten station. The platform was half collapsed, metal beams hanging like frozen skeletons. Frost covered every surface, and in the dim light from my flashlight, the space seemed endless. I could hear the faint drip of melting ice somewhere far away. Every step forward made my stomach tighten. And then I saw it. A shape hunched near the end of the platform. My heart stopped. It looked human at first, wrapped in tattered layers of cloth, shivering. But the longer I watched, the more I realized something was wrong. Its movements were jerky, unnatural. Every time it moved an arm, it rattled like metal on bone. Its head twitched violently, and its gaze, or what I assumed was its gaze, locked onto mine. Shadow barked sharply, his body stiff with tension. I whispered, "Stay." The creature's head tilted slowly, making that impossible creaking sound again. The light from my flashlight flickered, casting the figure in harsh shadows. I thought about running, but the tunnel behind me was a long stretch of frozen emptiness. No safety, only the open path I had taken. I knew if I ran blindly, I might slip or fall. I had to face it. I stepped forward, trying to appear calm. "Who's there?" I called softly. My voice echoed unnaturally in the chamber. The figure froze. It did not respond. Its head twitched toward me again, and a thin wisp of fog escaped what looked like a mouth. Its breathing, if you could call it that, was uneven, rattling. I inched closer, flashlight trembling in my hand. I had to see if it was alive. If it was human. Or if it was something else entirely. Shadow stayed close, growling low, eyes fixed on the figure. Suddenly, the figure lurched forward. Its movements were so fast and unnatural that I stumbled back. The sound it made, a harsh, grating noise, filled the chamber. I swung the metal pipe I had been carrying, hoping to keep it at bay. Shadow barked furiously, lunging forward. The figure hesitated. Then it bolted toward the far tunnel, disappearing into the darkness. I exhaled shakily, adrenaline pumping through my veins. My hands shook, and Shadow pressed close, tail low. I realized then that whatever it had been, it had not attacked. Yet the terror it inspired was absolute. I sank against the wall, trying to calm myself. The tunnels felt endless, a labyrinth frozen in time. Every shadow could hide another of those things, every sound could be a threat. I had to keep moving. We could not stay here. Not safe. I looked at Shadow. "You and me, boy. We're going deeper. Maybe find a real safe spot. Somewhere the cold can't reach. Somewhere the city above is just a distant memory." I picked myself up and started walking again. The tunnel curved, leading downward into deeper shadows. The temperature dropped, the air growing heavier with frost. My lungs burned, my fingers were numb despite gloves, and my teeth chattered uncontrollably. Shadow stayed close, occasionally glancing back as if to check I was still there. Hours, or maybe minutes, time felt meaningless here, passed as we moved deeper. The walls of the tunnel became older, rougher, lined with cracked bricks and rusted pipes. Occasionally, faint traces of graffiti appeared, remnants of lives once lived. In this frozen silence, they seemed like messages from ghosts. Then I saw light, a faint, warm glow coming from an opening ahead. My pulse quickened. Could it be another survivor? A hidden chamber? Maybe even heat, something rare enough in this world to feel like salvation. I moved closer, shadow alert beside me, ears pricked forward. As we rounded the final corner, the source of light became clear. A small chamber, walls insulated with thick metal panels, a faint hum of machinery, and in the middle, a flickering heat lamp suspended from the ceiling. The room smelled faintly of oil and warm metal, a strange comfort after the bitter chill. And in the corner, curled up and huddled, a bundle of fur and cloth, a small dog, shivering violently. Shadow barked once, low and warning, then immediately padded forward. The other dog wagged a cautious tail. Relief washed over me. Life. Even here, in this frozen nightmare, life survived. I sank to the floor beside the heat lamp, my body aching, exhausted. Shadow pressed close, nuzzling the new dog. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I allowed myself a small, shaky laugh. Survival was still possible. But deep in the shadows of the tunnel beyond the chamber, I could still feel it watching. Something had followed us this far. Something that was patient, enduring, and far colder than the world outside. And I knew this fight had only just begun. The warmth from the small heat lamp wrapped around my shoulders like a fragile shield, though it barely made a dent against the bitter cold that had seeped into my bones over the last few days. Shadow pressed close to the smaller dog, nuzzling the shivering bundle, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to breathe, just for a moment. The smell of warm metal, oil, and faintly charred wires filled the small chamber, a scent almost alien compared to the icy tang outside. I looked around, examining the walls. Thick metal panels lined them, reinforced with rusted brackets. The floor was concrete, frost-free near the lamp but slick with a thin layer of ice where the heat hadn't reached. A set of pipes ran overhead, humming faintly as if carrying some invisible power through the veins of this forgotten place. I had to move. The warmth was temporary, and the moment I stepped back into the tunnels, the cold would reclaim me. I gathered the small dog in my arms, tucking it gently under my coat with Shadow following closely, tail twitching with cautious curiosity. Its fur was matted and frosted, but alive. That was enough for now. Survival was enough. I pressed a hand to the wall, running it along the metal panels, searching for an exit or a hidden doorway. In this city of ice, the buildings above had collapsed under the weight of snow, but underground, the tunnels offered possibilities, places the storm could not touch. I traced the edges of the chamber and found a narrow hatch partially hidden under a fallen pipe. Rusted, frozen shut, but not irreparably. My fingers ached as I worked the latch, twisting it with every ounce of strength I had. Shadow whimpered softly beside me. I spoke to him gently, coaxing him to stay calm. We had to get deeper. We had no choice. The latch gave way with a shriek of rusted metal. A cloud of dust and tiny ice crystals rose from the hinges. I moved aside and lifted the hatch. Beyond it lay a ladder descending into pitch black. My flashlight flickered as I aimed it downward, catching the rungs barely visible under a thin layer of frost. My stomach tightened. I didn't know how far down this went. I didn't know what awaited us. But the cold outside would kill us faster than anything else, and that gave me little choice. I started down the ladder carefully, Shadow following as closely as he could without slipping. The small dog, bundled under my coat, let out a faint whine, and I murmured soothing words, trying to calm it. The darkness below was absolute, broken only by the trembling beam of my flashlight. My heart pounded as I descended, the metal of the ladder slick beneath my gloves. The wind from above had died here, replaced by a hollow echo that made every small sound exaggerated, the creak of the ladder, my boots scraping the metal, Shadow's claws clicking on concrete. At the bottom, the ladder ended at a landing covered in frost. I stepped onto it cautiously, scanning the room with my light. The space was enormous, much larger than the small chamber above. A vaulted ceiling disappeared into darkness, supported by massive metal beams coated in ice. Pipes and conduits snaked along the walls and ceiling, carrying unknown liquids or gases. The faint hum of machinery was louder here, almost rhythmic, like the slow breathing of the building itself. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped, a slow, echoing tap-tap-tap that sounded like a heartbeat. I moved forward, boots crunching on ice. The heat lamp from the chamber above had given us a little energy, but my body protested, stiff and aching. Shadow padded beside me silently, ears flat, every sense alert. I glanced down at the smaller dog, now peeking out from under my coat, eyes wide and shivering. I whispered to it softly. "You're safe. For now." The deeper chamber was filled with signs of long-abandoned technology. Rusted control panels lined one wall, blinking faintly with residual power. Large machines, their purpose lost to time, sat silent, their metal frames coated in frost. I ran my hand along one and felt a vibration, faint but present. The building had life, even here in the depths. Or maybe it was just the echo of the city above, transmitted through the metal skeleton of the structure. I paused, listening. There was a faint scratching sound, irregular, coming from somewhere ahead. My pulse quickened. Shadow growled low, tail stiff. The sound grew closer, deliberate and slow, as if whatever it was pacing. I gripped the metal pipe in my hand, flashlight illuminating the nearest row of machines. My breath fogged in front of me, each exhale sharp and cold even in this relatively sheltered space. And then I saw it. A figure emerged from the darkness, moving stiffly. At first, I thought it was another survivor, huddled under layers of tattered clothing, but the way it moved was wrong. Joints bent at impossible angles, head tilted, movements jerky yet purposeful. Its skin glistened with frost, eyes pale and hollow. It let out a low, gurgling rasp, the sound echoing through the vast chamber. Shadow lunged forward, barking and growling, but I yanked him back, whispering, "Easy. Don't provoke it." The creature paused, tilting its head toward us. Its breath escaped in icy puffs, mist curling in the dim light. It moved closer, slow but relentless, dragging its left foot slightly, leaving a streak of ice and frost in its path. My grip on the pipe tightened. I had faced panicked mobs before, desperate humans trying to steal warmth, food, survival. This was different. This was a predator made of cold, death, and patience. I scanned the room desperately. Machines, control panels, large crates, anything I could use for defense. The creature stopped a few feet away, tilting its head again. Then it lunged. I swung the pipe, striking its shoulder. There was a hollow, wet crunch. Shadow barked and leapt, teeth flashing. The creature shrieked, a high, unnatural noise, staggering backward. But it recovered quickly, jerking forward again. I swung, missed, and felt my heart hammering. The small dog whimpered in my coat, but I pressed my palm to its head, murmuring, "Stay calm. We have to survive this." The creature circled us now, careful, watching, testing. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew that in this frozen chamber, escape was limited. If I ran blindly, the slick metal floor and uneven ice could kill me faster than the thing chasing us. I had to think. My eyes fell on one of the machines, a large generator, its frame coated in frost but still connected to some power source. Maybe if I could activate it, create heat, light, noise, anything. It might give us a chance. I edged toward it slowly, swinging the pipe in front of me, keeping the creature at bay. Shadow stayed alert, growling low, hair on end. The generator had a manual crank. My fingers, stiff with cold, struggled to turn it, but finally, with a grating screech, it sparked to life. A faint red light glowed, illuminating the far corner of the chamber. The hum of electricity filled the room, and a surge of warmth, not much, but enough to bite against the icy chill, radiated from the machine. The creature paused, cocking its head at the noise, unsure. Shadow growled, "Closer now." I took a step forward, heartbeat steadying. Then, with a sudden burst, the creature lunged again. But the light, the heat, and Shadow's aggression were enough to stop it this time. It hissed, then retreated into the darkness of the far end of the chamber, dragging itself away slowly, deliberately, leaving a trail of frost behind. I sank to my knees, gasping. The generator hummed, filling the chamber with warmth, light, and the faint hope that we could survive another hour, another day. Shadow pressed close, small dog peeking from under my coat. Alive. We were alive. But I knew this was only temporary. The city was frozen. The tunnels were filled with dangers we had barely begun to understand. And somewhere in the shadows, waiting, patient and relentless, the thing that had followed us would return. For now, all I could do was hold on to warmth, life, and hope, and prepare for the next wave of the Ice Age apocalypse. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Shadow lay close to me, low growls rumbling in his throat, ears twitching at every faint sound from the tunnel beyond. The smaller dog huddled against my chest, shivering, and I pressed my coat tighter around it, whispering reassurances I barely believed myself. The generator's low hum provided a strange sort of comfort, filling the chamber with a mechanical heartbeat, the first sign of life other than us in this frozen city. But even with the warmth, the fear never left. I kept picturing that creature, the frost-coated thing that had followed us here, its hollow eyes glowing in the darkness. It had been patient, stalking us, testing us, and I knew it would return. Morning came, though it felt almost meaningless in this underground world. The dim light from above barely reached the depths where we were hiding. Dust motes floated in the weak rays, illuminated by the generator's glow, and the air was still thick with frost. I leaned against a machine, arms crossed, trying to will my stiff, aching muscles back to life. Shadow padded along the edge of the chamber, sniffing, alert, and the small dog shifted in my coat, whining softly. We had survived another night, but survival alone wasn't enough. We needed food, water, and better shelter. The generator could give us warmth, but it would not last forever. I traced my finger along the cold metal walls, scanning for another path. Tunnels always led somewhere. Somewhere deeper, or at least somewhere less exposed. My mind wandered back to the grocery store, to the cans of soup I had scavenged. 3 cans. That was all we had. 1 bite each, and we were barely alive. I needed to find more. I needed to find sustenance before the cold and starvation overtook us. Shadow barked suddenly, low and urgent, and I snapped my head toward him. There, at the far end of the chamber, I saw a movement. The generator's weak light flickered across a shadow that shifted too quickly to be human. I froze, gripping the pipe tightly. The creature. No, something smaller. Something alive. Human maybe, but I couldn't be sure. I crept forward, careful not to make a sound. Shadow followed, tail low, growl rumbling. The figure crouched near the debris of an old staircase, shivering. I raised my voice softly, "Hello. Are you all right?" The figure froze, head snapping toward me. Eyes wide, face pale, lips blue from cold. It was a man, gaunt, thin, clothed in layers of rags. He hesitated, then nodded slightly, shivering. I stepped closer, hands raised, pipe ready. "It's okay," I said. "We won't hurt you." He looked from me to Shadow, then back, unsure. Finally, he whispered, "Water. Food. Please." I exhaled slowly. Another survivor. Relief and suspicion warred in my chest. I had seen too many desperate people in my life, people capable of violence when survival demanded it. But this man looked more like a ghost than a threat. Thin, frostbitten fingers clinging to a small, frozen backpack. I knelt slightly, offering what comfort I could. "We have some warmth here," I said. "Come." He hesitated, then moved slowly toward us. Shadow sniffed, cautious but accepting. The smaller dog whimpered at the sight of another living creature, but calmed when I spoke softly. The man sank to the floor near the generator, wrapping his arms around himself. I didn't ask his name yet. Names meant little in this world where life was measured in hours, not days. We stayed silent for a long moment, listening to the hum of the generator and the faint dripping of water somewhere in the chamber. The man's teeth chattered, and I knew he needed heat and sustenance more urgently than anything else. I rummaged in my coat pockets, pulling out the 3 cans of soup. They were frozen solid, but I placed them near the generator for a few minutes to thaw slightly. Shadow sniffed the cans curiously. The small dog whined, tugging at the edge of the coat. The man reached out with trembling hands, taking the first can. He fumbled with the lid, and I helped him pry it open. The smell, faint and metallic from the tin, filled the chamber. He inhaled sharply, closing his eyes as if the aroma alone could bring life back to his frozen limbs. I handed him a spoon from my bag, and he ate slowly, shivering, barely speaking. We shared the second can between us, me taking small bites, careful not to consume it all. Shadow and the smaller dog huddled closer to my legs, warmth radiating from our bodies in small, precious increments. The third can I left near the man, letting him finish when he could. Once he had eaten, he spoke. "Name's Victor," he said, voice hoarse. I've been down here for days. The surface. It's not safe." I nodded, understanding without judgment. I had been wandering the frozen streets, searching for scraps, dodging frost and falling debris, avoiding the creatures the cold had spawned. I had survived by instincts honed over years on the streets, but the world had changed. The Ice Age apocalypse had claimed the city above, and now the tunnels were our only chance. We talked quietly, sharing information sparingly. Victor had found another entrance far to the west, a collapsed station with faint warmth trapped in a maintenance room. He had stayed there, waiting, hoping. Hoping for rescue, or at least company. I knew we couldn't stay in one place. The generator, though functional, was temporary. And whatever lurked deeper in the tunnels, the frost creature, or perhaps more than one, was patient. It stalked, waited for mistakes. I glanced at Shadow. The dog's ears twitched, eyes scanning the darkness, ready to protect, to attack if necessary. I placed a hand on his head, murmuring, "We need to move, boy." Victor and I packed what we could carry. The small dog pressed close to me as I tied the straps of my bag securely. Shadow stayed alert, watching every shadow, every corner. The tunnels stretched endlessly ahead, twisting, branching, dark and cold. I led the way, flashlight beam cutting a path through the shadows. The first stretch was deceptively quiet. We moved in silence, listening for the faintest hints of movement. Occasionally, a drip of water, a groan of metal, the distant echo of ice cracking. Every sound was amplified in the frozen tunnels. I could feel the presence of the city above, its weight pressing down, the cold seeping through every crack, every seam. Then we heard it, a scraping sound, slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere deep ahead. My pulse quickened. I motioned for the others to stop. Shadow growled low, body stiff. Victor froze, eyes wide. The small dog whimpered softly in my coat. The scraping grew louder, closer. I could see the faint shimmer of frost on the walls ahead, disturbed by some movement. I raised the pipe, flashlight trained on the corridor. And then it stepped into the beam. The frost creature. One of the same things that had stalked us in the station above. Its eyes, pale and lifeless, glimmered in the weak light. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, but terrifyingly fast. It paused, tilting its head, then lunged. I swung the pipe, hitting it on the shoulder. Shadow leapt, teeth snapping. Victor screamed, backing away, but I grabbed his arm, pulling him behind me. The creature hissed, its breath sharp, frosty, like a knife cutting through the air. We ran. Through the twisting tunnels, the three of us, dogs and humans alike, scrambling over ice, sliding under fallen pipes, hearts pounding. Behind us, the scraping and hissing grew louder. I could hear the creature gaining. Every corner we rounded, every shadow we passed, held the promise of death. And yet, we ran. Because stopping was not an option. Because surviving, even one more moment in this frozen nightmare, was all we had left. We ran through the tunnels as if the walls themselves were closing in on us. My lungs burned, each breath freezing before it reached my lungs, and the small dog whimpered, pressed tight against my chest. Shadow ran ahead, ears pinned back, growling at every shadow, sniffing the air, trying to find a way through the frozen labyrinth. Victor stumbled behind me, dragging his feet over the slick metal floor, sweat mixing with the frost on his skin. The scraping sound followed us relentlessly, echoing off the metal walls. I dared not look back. Whatever it was patient, methodical, and fast. We had no choice but to keep moving, deeper into the tunnels. My flashlight flickered intermittently, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed alive, twisting around corners and pillars. Every step was a risk. The ice underfoot was treacherous, jagged shards threatening to slice through boots and skin alike. I led the group down a narrow passage, one I had remembered from previous trips. The walls were closer here, coated in frost, tunnels bending in sharp angles. The scraping behind us grew louder, almost synchronized with our panicked breathing. I gripped my metal pipe like a lifeline, swinging it loosely to clear the path and prepare for the inevitable attack. Shadow barked, low and menacing, the sound vibrating in the enclosed space. The small dog whimpered again, pressing against Victor, who was breathing heavily, eyes wide with terror. We came to a junction. 3 paths lay ahead, each dark, cold, and uncertain. My flashlight's beam trembled in my gloved hand as I tried to make a decision. One path sloped downward into what looked like maintenance tunnels, pipes and conduits running along the walls. Another led sharply upward, ending in a thick metal door with frost streaking across it. The third was a narrow crawlspace, barely big enough for me to squeeze through. I paused, listening. The scraping noise had stopped, replaced by a faint, hollow hiss. My stomach clenched. The thing was calculating. Waiting. Testing. I chose the downward path, hoping the maintenance tunnels would offer more options and possibly lead to a forgotten exit or supply cache. The slope was steep, slick with ice. I took slow, careful steps, sliding occasionally, using the metal pipes along the walls for support. Shadow went ahead, sniffing, growling, keeping us alert. The small dog pressed tight against my chest, quivering. Victor followed, shivering, his movements clumsy and desperate. The tunnels narrowed, walls damp and frost-coated, the air growing heavier, colder, almost suffocating. My breath fogged in front of me, freezing in midair. Suddenly, the scraping noise returned, louder, closer, echoing off the tunnel walls. I froze, listening. Shadow growled low, hackles raised, teeth bared. The small dog whimpered. Victor froze beside me, eyes wide. I motioned for silence, gripping the pipe, and strained to listen. Then it came into view. The frost creature, moving with unnatural speed and jerky precision. Its eyes glimmered, pale and lifeless. Its limbs were twisted, frosted over, and its breath escaped in sharp puffs of ice. It lunged. I swung the pipe, striking it in the shoulder. It hissed, recoiled, then lurched forward again. Shadow leapt, biting at its leg, yelping as the creature swiped at him with a frozen hand. Victor screamed, stumbling backward, scraping his knuckles on the ice-covered wall. The small dog barked, high-pitched and desperate. I grabbed Victor, pulling him behind me. We ran. The creature followed, relentless. The tunnels twisted, narrowed, and dipped, each turn bringing new dangers. Loose metal, jagged ice, debris from collapsed walls. My feet slipped repeatedly, each misstep threatening to throw us into the jagged ice. Shadow kept pace, teeth snapping at anything near the creature, keeping it at bay. We reached a fallen metal ladder lying across the tunnel floor. I leapt over it, then Victor, then the small dog still bundled under my coat. The creature lunged, hitting the ladder with a deafening clang, shattering it partially. Sparks flew where it struck metal. Shadow growled furiously, snapping at the creature, forcing it back. We rounded a corner into a larger chamber, the walls lined with frost-covered machinery. Old control panels blinked faintly, some humming with residual power. I spotted an old maintenance cart and yanked it across the floor, creating a barrier between us and the creature. It shrieked, a horrible, gurgling noise, and lunged again. Shadow barked, teeth flashing, keeping it momentarily distracted. Victor collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. His eyes were wide, filled with terror. The small dog whimpered, pressing closer to me. I tightened my grip on the pipe. There was no time to rest. The creature would not stop. I looked around desperately. One of the control panels had a lever protruding from it. If I could swing it, maybe I could drop one of the metal gates, block its path. I sprinted toward it, pipe ready, Shadow close behind. The creature hissed, swiping at me with icy claws. I ducked, swung the lever with all my strength, and heard the grinding of metal as a gate dropped. It hit the creature, knocking it back. It snarled, hissing, but could not pass. I exhaled shakily, relief flooding through me. For now, we had a barrier. Victor collapsed to the floor, exhausted, shivering violently. I knelt beside him, pressing my gloved hands to his shoulders. We had survived the encounter, but barely. Shadow stood over the barrier, teeth bared, growling low. The small dog whimpered, pressing against me. I looked at the chamber. Machinery, frost, and darkness stretched endlessly ahead. There had to be another way out, another safe place. We could not stay here. The creature would find a way past the barrier eventually. I helped Victor to his feet. We moved cautiously, Shadow leading, small dog bundled against my chest. The tunnels twisted and dipped, leading us deeper into the frozen heart of the city. The temperature dropped further, frost forming on our eyelashes, our breath freezing instantly. Every sound echoed, amplified by the metal and ice, every shadow seemed alive. Then, ahead, I saw it, a faint glimmer of light. Warm, amber, artificial. A room, insulated from the cold. Could it be a maintenance chamber? A storage room? Any warmth was precious, and we pressed forward, cautious but desperate. As we approached, the scraping noise returned, faint but unmistakable. The creature was not far behind. Shadow growled low, hackles raised. The small dog whimpered. I gripped my pipe, ready for whatever came next. We reached the room, pushing the door open carefully. Warmth hit us like a wave. A small chamber, walls insulated, faint light from a flickering lamp, and crates of supplies, old cans, blankets, tools. I sank to the floor, relief washing over me. Shadow and the small dog huddled close, Victor leaning heavily against the wall. For the first time in days, I allowed myself a moment to breathe. Survival was possible. For now, we were safe. But the scraping noise in the tunnels reminded me that danger was never far behind, that the city had changed, that the Ice Age apocalypse was not finished with us yet. We were alive, yes. But alive in this frozen nightmare meant constant vigilance, constant movement, and a relentless struggle against cold, hunger, and the creatures that now hunted the ruins of New York. And I knew, deep down, that we had only just begun to understand the true scale of the ice, the tunnels, and the horrors that lurked beneath. We stayed in that small insulated chamber for what felt like hours, though in the tunnels, time had little meaning. Victor shivered against the wall, the small dog tucked into my coat still quivering, Shadow lying tense and alert beside us. The warm lamp did little to push back the deep cold that had seeped into our bones over the past days. I ran my gloved hands along the crates, searching for anything useful. Old cans of food, blankets stiff with frost, a few water bottles filled with ice-cold liquid. Not much, but enough to give us a small chance to move forward. I stripped the frost from one of the cans and handed it to Victor. He hesitated, then pried it open with shaking hands. The smell of preserved food, metallic and faintly sweet, filled the chamber. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, and I forced myself to do the same. Shadow sniffed the air cautiously, wagging his tail faintly, while the small dog pressed closer to my chest. Once we had eaten, I inspected the chamber more closely. Metal panels lined the walls, reinforced pipes ran overhead, and a few old machines hummed faintly with residual power. One corner had a small door, half obscured by frost. I approached it, wiping away the ice. The door opened into a narrow passage, descending further into darkness. My gut tightened. Deeper meant colder, darker, more dangerous. But it also meant more shelter from the horrors above ground. I turned to Victor. We have to move. It's not safe to stay here. The thing in the tunnels. It will find us eventually. He nodded, swallowing hard. Shadow growled low, ears pinned. The small dog whimpered but did not resist. I picked it up, tucking it into my coat again. We set out, descending the narrow passage, flashlight beam cutting through the black. The walls closed in around us, frost glinting like broken glass. Each step echoed ominously, making every sound feel amplified, as if the tunnels themselves were listening. The air grew heavier the further we descended, cold and damp. I could feel moisture forming on my eyelashes, freezing instantly. My breath came in shallow gasps, and every movement was labored. The tunnels twisted unpredictably, some passages blocked by fallen metal, debris, or collapsed ceilings. Shadow padded ahead, sniffing, growling, always alert. Victor stumbled behind me, hands scraping along the walls for support. The small dog whined softly, pressed tight against my chest. We rounded a corner into a larger chamber. It was more open, with high ceilings and metal beams crisscrossing overhead. Frost covered every surface. The sound of dripping water echoed endlessly, like a distant heartbeat. My flashlight caught movement at the far end. I froze. Shadows danced, flickering in the weak beam. The scraping noise returned, faint at first, then louder, deliberate. The creature. I motioned for silence. Shadow growled low, teeth flashing. Victor froze, eyes wide. The small dog whimpered softly. I gripped the metal pipe tightly. The frost creature emerged from the darkness, limbs jerking unnaturally, breath curling in icy puffs. Its eyes glimmered faintly, hollow and cold. I scanned the chamber quickly. Rusted machines, fallen crates, metal beams. Anything we could use. The creature moved with jerky precision, stalking toward us, calculating. I tightened my grip on the pipe, preparing for the inevitable attack. Then, as if reading my thoughts, the creature lunged. I swung the pipe, striking its arm. A hollow, wet crunch echoed through the chamber. Shadow leapt, snapping at its legs. Victor screamed, stumbling backward, scraping his knuckles on the ice-covered floor. The small dog barked, high-pitched and frantic. We ran deeper into the chamber, twisting through the maze of pipes and machinery. The creature followed, relentless. Its jerky movements made it unpredictable, dangerous. Every corner we turned, every shadow we passed, felt like a trap. I swung the pipe at anything within reach, trying to keep it at bay, while Shadow bit and lunged, snarling. We reached a narrow corridor, partially collapsed, ice covering the walls and floor. I helped Victor over a fallen beam, then crawled after him. The small dog whimpered, pressed against my chest, while Shadow slipped ahead, agile and alert. The scraping noise behind us grew louder, echoing, relentless. I could feel exhaustion setting in. My legs ached, my lungs burned, my hands were numb from cold and strain. But we couldn't stop. Stopping meant death. The tunnels twisted further, leading into a section I had only passed once before, a maintenance labyrinth filled with old machinery, pipes, and half-frozen water pumps. It was a place of shadow and echo, where sound twisted and reflected, making every step disorienting. We entered cautiously. Shadow's growl vibrated in the tight space, the small dog pressed against my chest, Victor stumbling behind me. The frost creature was close. I could hear its uneven breathing, the scrape of metal on ice, the hollow crack of its movements. It was patient, stalking us, waiting for mistakes. I spotted an old service ladder leading upward, toward a grated platform above. It might lead to another chamber or exit. I pointed. Ladder. Up. Victor nodded weakly. I climbed first, gripping the frozen rungs tightly. Shadow followed, small dog secured under my coat. The ladder rattled, metal groaning under our weight. The scraping behind us grew closer. Halfway up, Victor slipped, hands scraping against metal. I grabbed his arm, pulling him up. Shadow barked furiously, snapping at the approaching creature. It paused, then lunged. I swung the pipe, connecting with its arm. A gurgling hiss echoed through the chamber. We reached the platform, panting, shivering, hearts hammering. The small dog whimpered, Shadow growling low, hackles raised. I scanned the room above. A grated door, partially open, leading into another chamber. Light flickered faintly from within. Warmth. Possibility. We moved cautiously, stepping onto the grated floor. The scraping grew distant for a moment, then returned, echoing from the tunnels below. The creature hadn't given up. It would not. But for now, we had a temporary sanctuary.